Hey there, and welcome to a live edition of Occult Book Club. I have a copy of H.P. Blavatsky's The Key to Theosophy. This copy, as you may immediately notice, it's very interesting because it's covered in tape. I don't know what I'm going to do with that in the long term because this is definitely packing tape of some sort. It is not graded for books. It is definitely not acid free, and it will have to at some point be removed for the future preservation. But that's a future journey I'm going to take together with this book. Um, so this is a theosophy work. Obviously, it's the key to theosophy. I do not have a lot of theosophy material. I think this may be my only book by Blavatsky. I have some of her students' work or people who were kind of tapped into theosophy and did their own thing. I think Alice Bailey, for instance, the Seven Rays thing, all of that. It kind of goes back to theosophy, and that's why I'm actually looking into theosophy. This is not a stopping point. This is just kind of a station on the way to other things. This is a very important point in the evolution of the occult because Blavatsky popularized and kind of, I'd say that she sort of curated quite a lot of occult materials into one form. In fact, you can consider that both a plus and a minus. As a plus, she brought a lot of different occult materials to a more mainstream and popular audience, like a lot at once. So a lot of people learned about a lot of topics at once. On the other hand, her way of tying all of these things together as one unified thing, one unified theory, and feeding it all into her personal theory of how everything works, ends up being incorrect, for one. Like, just at a factual level, it's not right. This is around the same time that we're getting like the Golden Bough, I think, being written, and everybody's really into that. Maybe I think we might also be getting the White Goddess around her time period, and so you have a lot of very foundational um materials that have to do with either archaeology or um with just general like history that end up being more theoretical than actual, or a large part of their theories end up being incorrect, even if there are other correct parts of the books. So you have to tread lightly. You have to understand whenever you read through books like this. I mean, this is very old. Let me give you a year on this, actually. Oh, yeah, yeah. This came from the J.H. Rathbone Museum in Indiana. I like to keep those slips in the things that I get because I like to be able to contact people later if I want more stuff. I want to be able to ring the dealer up for more. 1920. This was printed in 1920. Now, when did it was first published in 1889? Right. It's hard to get the original 1800s editions, but there were a lot of reprints in the 20s. Like, really see a lot of this theosophical and spiritism stuff in the 20s. In the 30s, it starts tapering off, but it's still there. Resurgence in the 60s and the 70s as certain people get kicked out of the parapsychology departments and have to go spiritualist instead. It's kind of like the revival of spiritualism that I think Dan Aykroyd may have joined. Check out Ghostbusters for its spiritualism, by the way. It's pretty hilarious where ectoplasm comes from. So this stuff is old. It's old and it's out of date, and that's not the only thing that makes it racist and anti-Semitic. It's also so you want to see something anti-Semitic, and this was not intentioned at the time. Obviously, it's 1889, and we don't have Nazis yet. But this right here, she makes the logo of Theosophy. Make sure you can see that in the light. There we go. The logo of Theosophy has a swastika on the top and a Star of David in the middle, with an Ankh in the middle of that, and an Ouroboros around it all. Really just Full Metal Alchemisting it up. In fact, I quite honestly think that Full Metal Alchemist may refer a little bit to not exactly theosophy, but the mindsets of theosophy, because Full Metal Alchemist examines concepts similar to anti-Semitism. She has analogs to different people, so there's not literally Jews in Full Metal Alchemist, but the people of Iqbal, I believe, Ishbalians, they're like analogous, and it's very interesting that they have a type of magic that they do that is then learned off of and then appropriated by a like imperial culture that then tries to wipe out their existence. That's what happens in Full Metal Alchemist. That's also something that we had try to happen to Jews in this world. Like, it's really hard looking at material like this because I don't know how much Blavatsky realized this was going to feed into. She was actively anti-Semitic, as were many occultists at the time. To be honest, I've been researching this a lot to see not just what exactly was the thinking, but how much of their magic systems are dependent on things that are taken from other cultures, and how that functions within their magic. Does it have an impact, and what impact does it have? And if it does, and we want to eliminate that impact or remove it, then how do you do that? How do you just take out the elements? What do you replace it with? Do you replace it at all? Do you use it at all? Most of all, I just want to learn, because Blavatsky is talked about quite a lot still. She had a very large impact as an occultist. She had an impact on the study of magic, on the study of psychic ability, and she is a force that we're still correcting for, because sometimes she was incorrect, and sometimes you need to go back to the source to see where did this enter in? Where's the originator of this particular entry into the occult? When did we start doing this? And why did we decide to do it like this? And the only way is to look through the material. Now, I will say, whenever you've got an author that's very long dead, you don't really have to worry about supporting them financially. And whenever you buy an extremely used book, this is 102 years old, and it's held together by packing tape. This book is like, purchasing this book doesn't really harm someone because it's used, and whenever I get books like this where I don't really feel like I need an archival copy, I try to get kind of the cheapest possible while still being representative of what someone would have had at the time. Like, I want to know what kind of book somebody in 1920 was actually holding. I would love to actually have an 1800s copy, but those are a lot harder to find affordable versions of. So I usually go for like around the 20s reprints. By about the 30s, I think we start getting paper that's a lot pulpier, and so it doesn't survive as well. Around this time, you see paper change a lot. It's very, very high quality the closer to the 1900s it gets, and then after that, pulpier it gets. Anyway, that's about paper, but let's look at the book. So opening it up, like I said, lower quality. There's a lot of damage here. This tape is holding on the cover on the front. It would rip away otherwise. There's some paper that's a little bit loose here, a little bit. Like, I might want to go in with some temporary removable book tape. Nice little title in here. The Key to Theosophy, a clear exposition in the form of question and answer of the ethics, science, and philosophy for the study of which the Theosophical Society has been founded, by H.P. Blavatsky, reprinted verbatim from the original edition, first published in 1889. The United Lodge of Theosophists, Los Angeles, California, 1920. There we go. And dedicated by HPB to all her pupils, that they may learn and teach in their turn. One of the things about Theosophy is that it kind of kicked off this, learn all of the occult teachings and then go teach the occult teachings, like pass on the knowledge thing. in a more public way that was no longer bound up in like a secret society and their membership. Like this was a lot more open than say the OTO or the Rosicrucians, like say the AMORC, the American Order of Rosicrucians, not the ancient Rosicrucians. That's different. There are official businesses that have these names. It's utterly ridiculous, I know, but there is a real Illuminati somewhere, I'm sure. They're an LLC. Contents, Section 1, Theosophy and the Theosophical Society. The meaning of the name, the policy of the Theosophical Society, the wisdom religion, esoteric in all ages. Theosophy is not Buddhism. Oh, good. Thanks for letting me know. Section 2, Exoteric and Esoteric Theosophy, what the modern Theosophical Society is not. Theosophists and members of the TS. The difference between Theosophy and occultism. The difference between Theosophy and spiritualism. Around this time, we start to get a lot of very specific variants of things that are almost identical, and this is one of them. You're starting to see it's like, why isn't this occultism? Why isn't this spiritualism? And it's like at some point you're going to get spiritism, which is slightly different than spiritualism. It's great to be alive at this time, I'm sure. Why is theosophy accepted? Now that implies theosophy is accepted. That's a fun question. The working system of the TS, Section 3. The objects of the society, the common origin of man, are other objects on the sacredness of the pledge. They must hold to some sort of vow or a shared ethos that holds them accountable. If you can't have members held accountable to you in person because you know everybody, which is what happens whenever you have a secret society where you have to initiate everyone into it before they get to know anything. If someone can just buy a book and find it all out, then what keeps them staying ethical, what keeps them in line is a big question. So sometimes everybody just swears to the same pledge, kind of like the 10 Commandments in the Bible, except no one really follows those. No one really follows those at all. Section 4, the relations of the Theosophical Society to Theosophy, on self-improvement, the abstract and the concrete. Section 5, the fundamental teachings of Theosophy, on God and prayer. Is it necessary to pray? Prayer kills self-reliance. Ooh, I bet they think it's not necessary to pray. On the source of the human soul, the Buddhist teachings on the above. It's not Buddhism, by the way, but we're going to tell you about the Buddhist teachings. Section 6, Theosophical teachings as to nature and man, the unity of all in all, evolution and illusion, on the septenary constitution of our planet, the septenary nature of man. Septenary, by the way, is sevenfold, seven-based. The distinction between soul and spirit, the Greek teachings. Big spoilers, this is all basically going to be about the alchemical planets. And it's going to be interesting because Uranus and Neptune are discovered in like the late 1800s, I believe. And then Pluto is discovered right around the 1930s. I remember this because the order of their discovery is also the order of the decay from uranium to neptunium to plutonium. It's cray-cray. So Neptune was kind of implied from Uranus, and then they were able to cite it and prove it. It was a lot less like big of a deal because they kind of already knew that there was going to be a Neptune out there. And then Pluto, people were kind of busy at the time. Sums up the 1930s. Fundamental teachings of Theosophy, on God and prayer. No, we were already there. On the various post-mortem states, Section 7. Ooh, after death. The physical and the spiritual man, our eternal reward and punishment, and on nirvana. Remember, this isn't Buddhism, but they're going to use nirvana. The various principles in man. Section 8, on reincarnation or rebirth. What is memory according to Theosophical teaching? It continued. Why do we not remember our past lives? On individuality and personality. On the reward and punishment of the ego. Section 9, on the Kamaloka and Devachan. Oh boy! On the fate of the lower principles. Why Theosophists do not believe in the return of pure spirits, in quotations. A few words about the skandhas. On postmortem and postnatal consciousness. What is really meant by annihilation? Definite words for definite things. Section 10 on the nature of our thinking principle, the mystery of the ego, the complex nature of man, of manas. Oh, is this where they start borrowing from Hawaiian kahuna faith? The doctrine is taught in St. John's Gospel. Section 11 on the mysteries of reincarnation, periodical rebirths. What is karma? Who are those who know? The difference between faith and knowledge, or blind and reasoned faith. Has God the right to forgive? Section 12. What is practical theosophy? Duty, the relations of the TS to political reforms. On self-sacrifice, on charity, theosophy for the masses, how members can help the society, what a theosophist ought not to do. It's interesting. There's instructions on how to politically interact in here, and how to bring it into the public sphere, and how not to. Section 13 on the misconceptions about the Theosophical Society, Theosophy and asceticism, Theosophy and marriage, Theosophy and education. Why then is there so much prejudice against the TS? I love when they put this in their actual materials. Like, this is very similar to Scientology. Scientology, like, kind of immediately is like, why is there, I'm going to tell you why there's so much, bad press against us. And sometimes the first time that you hear that there's bad press against a group is when they tell you there's bad press against the group. And so then the group tells you their own bad press. And I know that they're trying to get ahead of it, but it also implies that there's so much of it. It's like the weirdest kind of messaging. Is the Theosophical Society a money-making concern? That's right after why is there so much prejudice against it. That's so sketch. The working staff of the TS. Section 14, the Theosophical Mahatmas. Whoo! Are they spirits of light or goblins damned? That's a chapter title. The abuse of sacred names and terms. This book may be an example of the abuse of sacred names and terms, honey. Conclusion, the future of the Theosophical Society. What's great is that we already know what that's going to be, which is that it's still, I think that the versions in the OTO survived a lot stronger than the Theosophy Society. I think pretty much everybody went to spiritualism or lodge magic or witchcraft. I don't really know if anybody practices Theosophy right now. I'm not sure how they would do it, because Theosophy itself evolved quite a lot in its span, and let's see. How would you practice Theosophy? Please tell me, Miss Blavatsky. I'm going to skip the preface. The meaning of the name. Inquirer. Theosophy and its doctrines are often referred to as a newfangled religion. Newfangled is a word they've got in the 1800s. Is it a religion? Theosophist. Oh, the inquirer means inquirer, colon. Theosophy and its doctrines are often referred to as a newfangled religion. Is it a religion? It is not. Theosophy is divine knowledge or science. What is the real meaning of the term? Divine wisdom, put in Greek, theosophia, or wisdom of the gods, theogenia, genealogy of the gods. The word theos, sorry, they literally put it in Greek letters here. Let me share with you what it is that I'm looking at. You see there, like, how they're like typing some stuff in Greek from time to time. It's kind of catching me off right now. I'll get used to it. The word theos means a god in Greek, one of the divine beings, certainly not God in the sense attached in our day to the term. Therefore, it is not wisdom of God as translated by some, but divine wisdom such as that possessed by the gods. The term is many thousand years old. Well, as are all things from ancient Greece. It doesn't make it any more special than the others. What is the origin of the name? It comes to us from the Alexandrian philosophers called lovers of truth, Philotheans, from phil, loving, and aletheia, truth. The name Theosophy dates from the 3rd century of our era and began with Ammonius Saccas. Look, I'm not going to bother pronouncing Latin right totally here. Accio pronunciation. Ammonius Saccas and his disciples who started the eclectic theosophical system, also called analogenesis. That's based on the word analogy. As explained by Professor Alex Wilder, FTS, in his eclectic philosophy, they were called so because of their practice of interpreting all sacred legends and narratives, myths and mysteries by a rule or principle of analogy and correspondence, so that events which were related as having occurred in the external world were regarded as expressing operations and experiences of the human soul. They were also denominated Neoplatonists. I've heard of the Neoplatonists. Though theosophy or the eclectic theosophical system is generally attributed to the 3rd century, yet if Diogenes Laertius is to be credited, its origin is much earlier, as he attributed the system to an Egyptian priest, Pat Amun, who lived in the early days of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The same author tells us that the name is Coptic and signifies one consecrated to Amun, the god of wisdom. Theosophy is the equivalent of Brahmvidya, divine knowledge. Whew, that's a lot of words, but I want to say this immediately. Whenever some stuff whenever they how old something is and they try to imply that because of the age of the word, it's like this is like thousands of years old, that is sus. We're talking a lot about just what the name of something is, but that doesn't mean that what Blavatsky is doing is like helming something that is literally thousands of years old. She's using a word that's thousands of years old. What was the object of this system? Comes to us from the eclectic theosophical system. Okay, so the eclectic theosophical system was started in the 3rd century Common Era. So she's starting from that. I think she's kind of collecting these things together because, this will not be analogous. If you look at, say, ancient Greek religion, it is not going to be close to what Christians do in the late 1800s. And all of these things are very Christian. As much as they put all these other signs on the thing, it's basically Jesus with some other symbols and some other religions pasted on a lot of times. That's one of the reasons it gets so insulting. Let's see. What was the object of this system? First of all, to inculcate certain great moral truths upon its disciples and all those who were lovers of the truth. Hence the motto adopted by the Theosophical Society, there is no religion higher than truth. Ooh. The chief aim of the founders of the eclectic Theosophical school was one of the 3 objects of its modern successor, the Theosophical Society. Namely, to reconcile all religions, sects, and nations under a common system of ethics based on eternal verities. Eternal truths. This particular drive to make a everything system that everything can go under and kind of explains how it all lives together was something that the imperial countries were each on their own within their own governments trying to sponsor and facilitate. And so you had a lot of people who followed those kinds of systems that were created then, or like followed the idea of that system being created, and then we're like, hey, what if I made this? That sounds really cool. I want to make one of mine, and it'll be like this, and it'll do this and that. And it was actually kind of like a trend of all of these different systems that tried to merge different religious systems together, or like different personal approaches to magic that would be like, okay, I see what they're doing over there in Buddhism and I like that concept, but I think it's similar to this concept that's over here in my religion, and I'm going to like fuse the two, a la a food cart. And what I find is flawed in this approach is that it's really hard to pass it on to anyone else afterward. What ends up happening is that whoever kind of takes it on ends up personalizing it all for their own practice. often translating out a lot of the stuff that was in the original that had like the fusion cultures on and making that like their own thing. And then they've got their own system, often evolves into something different entirely. So a lot of theosophists, I think, often just kind of end up doing their own thing instead of theosophy. Theosophy is kind of like a primer for alternative religion. Let's see. Um, what have you to show that this is not an impossible dream and that all the world's religions are based on the one and same truth? Their comparative study and analysis. The wisdom religion was one and end. The sameness of primitive religious philosophy is proven to us by the identical doctrines taught to the initiates during the mysteries, an institution once universally diffused. All the old worships indicate the existence of a single theosophy anterior to them. The key is that to open one must open all, otherwise it cannot be the right key. Basically, all doors lead to the same source kind of theory, which I don't find inherently wrong. I swear, I'm going to turn a page and she's going to say something crazy about Jews. That's really what I'm waiting for. The policy of the Theosophical Society. In the days of Ammonius, there were several ancient great religions, and numerous were the sects in Egypt and Palestine alone. How could he reconcile them? By doing that which we again try to do now. The Neoplatonists were a large body and belonged to various religious philosophies. So do our theosophists. In those days, the Jew Aristobulus affirmed that the ethics of Aristotle represented the esoteric teachings of the law of Moses. Philo Judaeus endeavored to reconcile the Pentateuch with the Pythagorean and Platonic philosophy, and Josephus proved that the Essenes of Carmel were simply the copyists and followers of the Egyptian therapeutae, the healers. See, there is a theory that the Hebrews got a lot of their spiritual stuff from the Egyptians, but like I've also seen theory that they got it from someone else, and I've also seen like disproof of that. So, and gods, this only gets worse in the modern era. It's not like we make this any clearer. Joseph is so it is in our day. Yeah, your day has passed. We can show the line of descent of every Christian religion, as of every, even the smallest sect. Well, as it so happens, the Christian religion is only about 2,000 years old. It's really easy to make that calculation because we modeled our calendar after it. The latter are the minor twigs or shoots grown on the larger branches, but shoots and branches spring from the same trunk. The wisdom religion. It's in all caps. It's all in caps. To prove this was the aim of Ammonius, who endeavored to induce Gentiles and Christians, Jews and idolaters, to lay aside their contentions and strifes, remembering only that they were all in possession of the same truth under various vestments, and were all the children of a common mother. This is the aim of theosophy likewise. That's the thing that I see put forth even earlier whenever they're attempting to put together religions like this that include Judaism and try to synthesize it with, say, Christianity and ancient Greek religion. There's a constant emphasis on this is the only way to stop global conflict and the only way to end world war is that everyone have a shared belief system, or everyone recognize that all their belief systems have a common root. And I really want to examine that assumption as I see more of it. And I want to see just how far back it goes, because this idea that we've all just got to have one religion that we do is very arbitrary, and it's really not like the approach to religion that I see in some of the colonial societies of like the Gilded Era and the Mercantile Era. Anyway, this idea that inventing a new religion that has all of the religions in the soup pot together, stirred up in an amazing blend, and that's the only way that we're going to avoid world war. I see this repeated a lot, and I think one of the reasons why people seem so driven in these texts is that I think to some extent they believed it. Ammonius taught that the religion of the multitude went hand in hand with philosophy, and with her had shared the fate of being by degrees corrupted and obscured with mere human conceits, superstitions, and lies, that it ought therefore to be brought back to its original purity by purging it of this dross and expounding it upon philosoph- philosophical principles. And the whole Christ had in view was to reinstate and restore to its primitive integrity the wisdom of the ancients, to reduce within bounds the universally prevailing dominion of superstition, and in part to correct and in part to exterminate the various errors that had found their way into the different popular religions. This idea that like this is all part of one big plan to make something really big happen also is rather recurrent. At some point, she's probably going to talk about the fact that there's um like these spirit elders that are telling her and other theosophists like the big secrets that humanity needs to know for the plan to happen. And I'll be quite honest. Part of the reason I'm interested in theosophy is because the time travel elements are very interesting to me. I mean, what if you had a time traveler um, affect the world in a way that it changed the course of religion, or like it showed up throughout. They changed something far back enough in history that it actually affected how we see religion today, then you might see it like something like this, which I don't think is what it is. I think that theosophy is more evidence that of like say something reaching out to humanity and humanity interpreting it like this, because for some reason instead of always interpreting something like Lord of the Rings, for like humanity likes to do these things too. And it's a lot of trouble to go through writing books, by the way. Like books are hard to write. I know this because I've written books and I've also attempted to write a lot more books than I've written. So I know it's very hard to write a book. And Blavatsky's Secret Doctrines series, like the textbooks, source books of theosophy, there's like 25 or 50 volumes of it. That's a whole ton of books. I know partially she may have just been writing to be able to sell books because a lot of people were like, that's how they would make money at the time. Like you run out of money and it's like, okay, I gotta sell another book and sell that to the publisher, and I've got enough money for another year. And that's like the guy who wrote all of the Oz books, L. Frank Baum. That's how he was making his living towards the end, was just like pumping out Oz books. So at a certain point, I'm like, are you writing it just to make money? Are you writing it because you believe in it? Is it a weird combination of both? I think it's a weird combination of both. So I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to flip. Prayer kills self reliance. Whoa, nice one. Landed right in the deep pool. But did not Christ himself pray and recommend prayer? Oh, special guest. Hold on. Special cat guest. Mm-hmm. You need some special cat? You want to be in my lap while I read? Okay. Y'all can't see her. I'm sorry. She's too low on the view plane. Here you go. Visible. Probably audible. She purrs very loud. Let's see. I marked the spot. But did not Christ himself pray and recommend prayer? It is so recorded, but those prayers are precisely of that kind of communion just mentioned with one's Father in secret. Otherwise, and if we identified Jesus with the universal deity, there would be something too absurdly illogical in the inevitable conclusion that he, the very God himself, prayed to himself and separated the will of that God from his own. An argument moreover, much used by some Christians. They say, I feel that I am not able to conquer any passions and weakness in my own strength. But when I pray to Jesus Christ, I feel that he gives me strength and that in his power I am able to conquer. That's the Inquirer, sorry. Theosophist. No wonder. If Christ Jesus is God, and one independent and separate from him who prays, of course everything is, and must be possible to a mighty God. But then where's the merit or justice either of such a conquest? Why should the pseudo-conqueror be rewarded for something which has cost him only prayers? Would you, even a simple mortal man, pay your laborer a full day's wage if you did most of his work for him, he sitting under an apple tree and praying to you to do so all the while? This idea of passing one's whole life in moral idleness and having one's hardest work and duty done by another, whether God or man, is most revolting to us as it is most degrading to human dignity. Oh, so this is starting to merge into the labor spirituality. The labor movement had a big spirituality, and there was this equivalent of doing labor or physical work with actual devoutness or devotion to God. That your actual labor in life was a sign of your spiritual devotion to God. I was not expecting to see that here. Perhaps so, yet it is the idea of trusting in a personal savior to help and strengthen in the battle of life, which is the fundamental idea of modern Christianity. And there is no doubt that, subjectively, such belief is efficacious, i.e., that those who believe do feel themselves helped and strengthened. Nor is there any more doubt. Nor is there any more doubt that some patients of Christian and mental scientists, the great deniers, oh, did we just reference Christian scientists? Oh boy. Are also sometimes cured, nor that hypnotism and suggestion, psychology, and even mediumship will produce such results as often, if not oftener, you take into consideration and string on the thread of your argument successes alone. And how about 10 times the number of failures? Surely you will not presume to say that failure is unknown even with a sufficiency of blind faith among fanatical Christians. So this entire chapter is basically Blavatsky debating with herself, because I mean she's just like creating a mental construct of a believer or a person to argue with. It's an inquirer, so they're not even Christian. They're just like, why don't you do like Christian does? And she's trying to imply that she's trying to argue that prayer is not the only way to do powerful things. And it's really odd to me that she feels the need to make this argument. Although maybe there was a lot more people who were arguing for the power of prayer at the time. I mean, it's kind of strange for me to read this stuff now because we've got a lot of religious debate in this country right now in the current time. But it's it's really strange. Oh gosh, they keep on asking about Buddhism. She keeps on making people ask about Buddhism. On the source of the human soul. How then do you account for man being endowed with a spirit and soul? Whence these? From the universal soul, certainly not bestowed by a personal God. Whence the moist element in the jellyfish? I don't know, H.P. Blavatsky. Whence is the moist element in the jellyfish? Oh man. Like, this is so on the cusp of science being science, so it's what makes it even sillier. The moist element still existed to some degree in the 1800s. That's basically the element of water. From the ocean which surrounds it, in which it lives and breathes and has its being, and whither it returns when dissolved. So the jellyfish comes, the water in the jellyfish comes from the ocean it's in. And the universal soul in us, or the soul in us, comes from the universal soul we're all in. That's what she's saying. So you reject the teaching that soul is given or breathed into man by God? We are obliged to. The soul spoken of in chapter 2 of Genesis, volume 7, is, as therein stated, the living soul or nephesh, the vital animal soul with which God, we say nature and immutable law, endows man like every animal, is not at all the thinking soul or mind, least of all is it the immortal spirit. Oh, do we have tripartite soul in here? Because now we're in Tradcraft, which I think Tradcraft got a bit from Theosophy, or they all kind of tapped from the same well, because it's part of what I'm trying to figure out is like, where are these people getting all their stuff from? And like, there's some stuff that they're smoking some crack that's not Buddhism, But there's also a whole bunch of Buddhism here because they just discovered Buddhism and they're like, oh my gosh, where is this in Christianity? Because there must be everything we discover must already be here in Christianity. It's got to have everything, right? Although she's basically she is stepping outside Christianity. I thought this would be to me it's a form of Christianity, but to her it's not. I think that's really really interesting. Um well, let us put it otherwise. Is it God who endows man with a human rational soul and immortal spirit? Again, in the way you put the question, we must object to it. Since we believe in no personal God, how can we believe that he endows man with anything? But granting, for the sake of argument, a God who takes upon himself the risk of creating a new soul for every newborn baby, all that can be said is that such a God can hardly be regarded as himself endowed with any wisdom or provision. Certainly, other difficulties and the impossibility of reconciling this with the claims made for the mercy, justice, equity, and omniscience of that God are so many deadly reefs on which this theological dogma is daily and hourly broken. I'm going to be like, WTF, but so's the inquirer here. What do you mean? What difficulties? I am thinking of an unanswerable argument offered once in my presence by a Singhalese Buddhist priest. Humble brag. A famous preacher to a Christian missionary, one in no way ignorant or unprepared for the public discussion during which it was advanced. It was near Colombo, and the missionary had challenged the priest Megadivati to give his reasons why the Christian God should not be accepted by the heathen, in quotations. Well, the missionary came out of that forever memorable discussion second best as usual. I should be glad to learn in what way. Man, she gives some amazing dialogue to her stooge. Simply this: the Buddhist priest premised by asking the padri whether his God had given commandments to Moses only for men to keep, but to be broken by God himself. The missionary denied the supposition indignantly. Well, said his opponent, you tell us that God makes no exceptions to this rule, and that no soul can be born without his will. Now, God forbids adultery, among other things, and yet you say in the same breath that it is he who creates every baby born and he who endows it with a soul. Are we then to understand that the millions of children born in crime and adultery are your God's work? Oh man, they're talking about adultery. Dang, getting down to the paint. That your God forbids and punishes the breaking of his laws, and that nevertheless he creates daily and hourly souls for just such children? How dare he? According to the simplest logic, your God is an accomplice in the crime, since, but for his help and interference, no such children of lust could be born. Where is the justice of punishing not only the guilty parents, but even the innocent babe for that which is done by that very God, whom yet you exonerate from any guilt himself? The missionary looked at his watch and suddenly found it was getting too late for further discussion. Wow. You forget that all such inexplicable cases are mysteries, and that we are forbidden by our religion to pry into the mysteries of God. No, we do not forget, but simply reject such impossibilities, nor do we want you to believe as we do. We only answer for the questions you ask. We have, however, another name for your mysteries. So this almost seems like answers that you should give to people if they ask you about things. This is, if you're a good theosophist, whenever somebody asks you about this thing about theosophy or this thing about other stuff, this will be the party line. This is what you should say. It's a very interesting approach because, like, I find that whenever I talk to a lot of people in very, like, in very similar Christian sects, they have that very similar, like, oh, you ask that, well, then the answer to that is this, and they'll kind of regurgitate it. But I find that they won't actually think about it. Instead, they'll just kind of say it like the last person who told it to them. And so it's harder to get into debate when it comes to that. Let's see. On the reward and punishment of the ego. I was interested in this section. I have heard that you say the ego, whatever the life of the person he incarnated in may have been on earth, is never visited with post-mortem punishment. Never, save in very exceptional and rare cases of which we will not speak here, as the nature of the punishment in no way approaches any of your theological conceptions of damnation. But if it is punished in this life for the misdeeds committed in a previous one, then it is this ego that ought to be rewarded also, whether here or when disincarnated. And so it is. If we do not admit of any punishment outside of this earth, it is because the only state of the spiritual self knows of hereafter is that of unalloyed bliss. What do you mean? Simply this: crimes and sins committed on a plane of objectivity and in a world of matter cannot receive punishment in a world of pure subjectivity. We believe in no hell or paradise as localities, in no objective hellfires and worms that never die, nor in any Jerusalems with streets paved with sapphires and diamonds. Gosh, all those Jerusalems with sapphires and diamonds. What's up with that? What we believe in is a post-mortem state or mental condition such as we are living in during a vivid dream. We believe in an immutable law of absolute love, justice, and mercy. And believing in it, we say, whatever the sin and dire results of the original karmic transgression of the now incarnated egos, no man or the outer material and periodical form of the spiritual entity can be held with any degree of justice responsible for the consequences of his birth. He does not ask to be born, nor can he choose the parents that will give him life. In every respect, he is a victim to his environment, the child of circumstances over which he has no control, and if each of his transgressions were impartially investigated, there would be found 9 out of every 10 cases when he was the one sinned against rather than the sinner. Life is at best a heartless play, a stormy sea to cross, and then a heavy burden often too difficult to bear. The greatest philosophers have tried in vain to fathom and find out its reason to tear, and have all failed except those who had the key to it, namely the Eastern sages. Life is, as Shakespeare describes it, but a walking shadow, a poor player, that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Nothing in its separate parts, yet of the greatest importance in its collectivity or series of lives. At any rate, almost every individual life is, in its full development, a sorrow. And are we to believe that poor, helpless men, after being tossed about like a piece of rotten timber on the angry billows of life, is, if he proves too weak to resist them, to be punished by a sempiternity of damnation, or even a temporary punishment? Never. Whether a great or an average sinner, good or bad, guilty or innocent, once delivered of the burden of physical life, the tired and worn out Manu, thinking ego, has won the right to a period of absolute rest and bliss. The same unerringly wise and just rather than merciful law, which inflicts upon the incarnated ego the karmic punishment for every sin committed during the preceding life on earth, provided for the now disembodied entity a long lease of mental rest, i.e., the entire oblivion of every sad event, to the smallest painful thought that took place in its last life as a personality, leaving in the soul memory but the reminiscence of that which was bliss or led to happiness. Plotinus, who said that our body was the true river of Lethe, for souls plunged into it forget all, meant more than he said. For as our terrestrial body is like Lethe, so is our celestial body in Devachan, and much more. So you have a body of forgetfulness and a body of remembrance. That's really interesting as a concept. Also, I find like the reflections on suffering to be interesting because I recently watched a summary of the movie Martyrs, which I do not suggest watching unless you are a big fan of gore. Pretty much everybody suggests that you don't actually watch it and just go look up what happened. But it talks about the idea that people who experience great pain during life can, if they're in an excruciating amount of pain, like a kind of transcendent amount of pain, can see into the realm beyond life. And whenever they do that, they show all these photos of people who are considered to be martyrs, and they have like these uplifted, transcendent faces, like Jesus painted on the cross. And so there's this belief that they must be seeing something, and so there's a group of people who are trying to find out what it is that they see. And in the end, it's not really revealed what it is that they see, but someone reacts to finding out. Like basically, someone is told on screen what it is that they see, but it's whispered so that the audience doesn't actually hear. And that person immediately extinguishes herself. And so the question is, well, what would make her speed her way? And I think it's because maybe it's something like this, where it's like once you pass, You basically no longer feel anxiety. I mean, to me, that's what that is. The entire oblivion of every sad event no longer feel anxiety. So apparently, the celestial body doesn't do anxiety, and it's the terrestrial body that does. Although I will say that the reason we have things like anxiety and other mental sensations and like emotional reactions, like mental illness, even like the reason that we have that is because of the chemicals in our brain. Like they are chemical reactions, and they're just like a part of being alive. Um, Life chemistry is hugely involved in life. That's why we see alchemy being so spiritual and representing chemistry as being so spiritual. Um, part of the physical existence of life necessitates chemistry and these chemical reactions that cause so much misery, but also so much deep, amazing interactions with the physical world. So I'm finding some interesting things in here. Um, let's see. I want to kind of see if I can look at some specific things instead of randomly flipping the stuff. So let me take a look at the table of contents. I'm going to try like one more section, and then I think I'm going to give this a rest because I've been up to this for almost an hour. Why do we not remember our past lives? Individual personality. Periodical rebirth. Mystery of the ego. Definite words for definite things. The Theosophical Mahatmas. I'm going to check this one out. Took me a little bit of reading over that to really gain an opinion. Thanks for bearing with me. Chapter 14, the Theosophical Mahatmas. Are they spirits of light or goblins damned? Who are they, finally, these whom you call your masters? Some say they are spirits or some other kind of supernatural beings, while others call them myths. They are neither. I once heard one outsider say to another that they were sort of male mermaids, whatever such a creature may be. But if you listen to what people say, you will never have a true conception of them. In the first place, they are living men born as we are born and doomed to die like every other mortal. They're time travelers. They are time travelers. They're time travelers. They're time travelers. They're time travelers. If they're not time travelers, they're psychics. They're probably time travelers. Woo! It's probably going to be stuff like the Dalai Lama. I'm calling that shot because I've read it in other places that are very related to this stuff. Yes, but is it rumored that some of them, but it is rumored that some of them are 1,000 years old. Is this true? As true as the miraculous growth of hair on the head of Meredith's shagpad. Wow, true as that, huh? I don't know what that is. Truly like the identical, no theosophical shaving has hitherto been able to crop it. The more we deny them, the more we try to set people right, the more absurd do the inventions become. I have heard of Methuselah being 969 years old, but not being forced to believe in it, have laughed at the statement, for which I was forthwith regarded by many as a blasphemous heretic. Okay. Seriously, though, do they outlive the ordinary age of men? What do you call the ordinary age? I remember reading in the Lancet of a Mexican who was almost 190 years old. Lancet must be a magazine. But I've never heard of a mortal man, layman, or adept who could live even half the years allotted to Methuselah. Some adepts do exceed by a good deal what you would call the ordinary age, yet there is nothing miraculous in it, and very few of them care to live very long. But what does the word Mahatma really mean? Simply a great soul. Great through moral elevation and intellectual attainment. If the title of great is given to a drunken soldier like Alexander, why should we not call those great who have achieved far greater conquests in nature's secrets than Alexander ever did on the field of battle? Besides, the term is an Indian and a very old word. Well, if it's a very old word, then it must be a religion. Sorry, the way that she talks about old words is kind of funny. Why do you call them masters? We call them masters because they are our teachers, and because from them we have derived all the theosophical truths. However, inadequately some of us may have expressed and otherwise understood them. They are men of great learning, whom we term initiates, and still greater holiness of life. They are not ascetics in the ordinary sense, though they certainly remain apart from the turmoil and strife of your Western world. But is it not selfish thus to isolate themselves? Where is the selfishness? Does not the fate of the Theosophical Society sufficiently prove that the world is neither ready to recognize them nor to profit by their teaching? She got backlash, so she's saying that's proof that it wouldn't work out. Of what use would Professor Clerk Maxwell have been to instruct a class of little boys in their multiplication table? Yeah, he was kind of busy with electricity. I understand. Besides, they isolate themselves only from the West. Oh, that's right. They're all supposed to be Eastern masters. Like I said, Dalai Lama. In their own country, they go about as publicly as other people do. Don't you ascribe to them supernatural powers? We believe in nothing supernatural, as I have told you already. Had Edison lived and invented his phonograph 200 years ago, he would have most purportedly have been burnt along with it, and the whole attributed to the devil. No, that's a little too late for that. Maybe 400 or 500. The powers by which they exercise are simply the development of potencies lying latent in every man and woman, and the existence of which even official science begins to recognize. Little back and forth. They're still like kind of believing in either by the time she's writing this, or at the time she's writing this. Is it true that these men inspire some of your writers, and that many, if not all, of your theosophical works were written under their dictation? Some have. There are passages entirely dictated by them in verbatim, but in most cases they only aspire the ideas and leave the literary form to the writers. Inspire the ideas, sorry. But this in itself is miraculous, is in fact a miracle. How can they do it? My dear sir, you are laboring under a great mistake, and it is science itself that will refute your arguments at no distant day. Why should it be a miracle, as you call it? A miracle is supposed to mean some operation which is supernatural, whereas there really is nothing above or beyond nature and nature's laws. Among the many forms of the miracle which have come under modern scientific recognition, there is hypnotism, and one phase of its power is known as suggestion, a form of thought transference which has been successfully used in combating particular physical diseases, etc. The time is not far distant when the world of science will be forced to acknowledge that there exists as much interaction between one mind and another, no matter at what distance, as between one body and another in closest contact. When two minds are sympathetically related, and the instruments through which they function are tuned to respond magnetically and electrically to one another, there is nothing which will prevent the transmission of thoughts from one to the other at will, for since the mind is not of a tangible nature, that distance can divide it from the subject of its contemplation. It follows that the only difference that can exist between two minds is a difference of state. So if this latter hindrance is overcome, where is the miracle of thought transference, at whatever instance? But you will admit that hypnotism does nothing so miraculous or wonderful as that. On the contrary, it is a well-established fact that a hypnotist can affect the brain of his subject so as far as to produce an expression of his own thoughts, and even his words, through the organism of his subject. And although the phenomena attaching to this method of actual thought transference are as yet few in number, no one, I presume, will undertake to say how far their action may extend in the future, when the laws that govern their production are more scientifically established. And so, if such results can be produced by the knowledge of the mere rudiments of hypnotism, what can prevent the adept in psychic and spiritual powers from producing results which, with your present limited knowledge of their laws, you are inclined to call miraculous? I mean, as a person who studied hypnotism pretty closely and linguistic programming and such, It's really interesting to look at the books that came out whenever they still believed in animal magnetism, and it's very interesting to see hypnotic suggestion interpreted as thought transference. I'm going to have to see if there's more of that. It would explain a lot of the overlap between hypnotism and psychic stuff. Then why do not our physicians experiment and try if they could not do as much? Actually, there's dentists who did it back then a lot. First of all, they are not adepts with a thorough understanding of the secrets and laws of psychic and spiritual realms, but materialists afraid to step outside the narrow groove of matter. She's dumping on materialists. And secondly, because they must fail at present, and indeed until they are brought to acknowledge that such powers are attainable. And could they be taught? Not unless they were first of all prepared by having the materialistic dross they have accumulated in their brains swept away to the very last atom. This is very interesting. Tell me, have the adepts thus inspired or dictated to many of your theosophists? No, on the contrary, to very few. Such operations require special conditions. An unscrupulous but skilled adept of the Black Brotherhood, Brothers of the Shadow, and Dugpas, we call them, has far less difficulties to labor under. For having no laws of the spiritual kind to trammel his actions, such a Dugpa sorcerer will most unceremoniously obtain control over any mind and subject it entirely to his evil powers. But our masters will never do that. They would never. Saruman would never. Never. They have no right, except by falling into black magic, to obtain full mastery over anyone's mortal ego, and therefore act only on the physical and psychic nature of the subject, leaving thereby the free will of the latter wholly undisturbed. Hence, unless a person has been brought into psychic relationship with the masters and is assisted by virtue of his full faith in and devotion to his teachers, the latter, whenever transmitting their thoughts to one with whom these conditions are not fulfilled, experience great difficulties in penetrating into the cloud of that person's sphere. But this is no place to treat a subject of this nature. Suffice it to say that if the power exists, then there are intelligences, embodied or disembodied, which guide this power, and living conscious instruments through whom it is transmitted and by whom it is received. We have only to beware of black magic. Oh no! What's that today? So many people use this term and then they have a definition for it, and it's like, why don't you just stop using the term? But what do you really mean by black magic? Simply abuse of psychic powers or of any secretive nature. The fact of applying to selfish and sinful ends the powers of occultism. A hypnotizer who, taking advantage of his powers of suggestion, forces a subject to steal or murder would be called a black magician by us. The famous rejuvenating system of Dr. Brown Sequard of Paris threw a loathsome animal injection into human blood, a discovery all the medical papers of Europe are now discussing, if true, is unconscious black magic. Rejuvenating system of Dr. Brown Sequard? We're going to have to stop here. We're going to have to look this up. Rejuvenating system, Dr. Brown Sequard. So you stay right here. I'm going to type this into Google. Don't panic. System, Dr. Brown Sequard. Well, he has a Wikipedia page, so that's a good start. Charles Edward Brown Sequard, FRS, was a Mauritian physiologist and neurologist who in 1850 became the first to describe what is now called Brown-Sequard syndrome. Well, who else would have brought it up? Blood. Keen observer and experimentalist. He contributed largely to our knowledge of the blood and animal heat, as well as many facts of the highest importance on the nervous system. He was one of the first to postulate the existence of substances now known as hormones secreted into the bloodstream to affect distant organs. So it looks like he did some experiment that someone didn't like. But there may have been a rumor that he was doing something that he didn't even do at all, which was very common in the day if somebody was trying to debunk or dispute science. Or sometimes people would just be scared and make up bullshit. I mean, it's just like today. It's only like about 100 years ago, a little bit more, 140. So I think I'm going to close here. That was an interesting little side bit. Um, Sorry, I kind of looked over the pages and got a little lost. I'm gonna take a look at the back here. It's interesting. The United Lodge of Theosophists Declaration. So there's like a little official thing in the back that is several pages long. Theosophy, a magazine dedicated to the Theosophical movement. Okay, these are all ads. Key to Theosophy, The Ocean of Theosophy, well, by William Q. Judge. The Occult World, Esoteric Buddhism, AP Senate. Oh, The Occult World and Esoteric Buddhism. Isis Unveiled, 2 volumes, H.P. Blavatsky. Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine. Here we go. Secret Doctrine is apparently it's 2 volumes, but like, there's an abridged doctrine, and there's a theosophical glossary. So, like, there's a lot of books here. This edition, published in London, contains some unwarrantable changes, but is in the main accurate and is the only one available. Interesting. Written for the instruction of students of occultism, it is sui generis and absolutely invaluable to the true student of the mysteries of life and being. I wonder how many of these were like this. Oh, the Bhagavad Gita. Notes on the Bhagavad Gita. Light on the path, the voice of the silence, letters that have helped me. So yeah, gonna close up. So my thoughts on this book. Glad I have it because it seems to be a pretty, like, if you want to understand what are the attitudes of Theosophy, what are the agendas, like what's their deal in politics. I mean, this has got it all in there. You just put it all on the page. I mean, some of the stuff I find, like, if you said some of the stuff that's in this book and you made it on a social media post, definitely people would get offended. But whenever people have offensive beliefs or notions, I'm kind of more glad when they say it out loud really clearly exactly what it is they mean, so I can know that. Interesting. I was expecting a little bit more anti-Semitism, but what I'm finding is a kind of passive anti-Semitism present in the attitudes of the time on religion, and I'm going to have to keep studying on that to get a better feel for the late 1800s experience of religion, because it's really interesting seeing this idea keep on popping up that, like, hey, we need to have this unifying religion so that everybody can stop going to war and it'll unify everyone and no one will fight anymore. I find that really interesting, considering we've got Catholicism and Protestantism in, like, England and such, like starting in England and then rolling out from there. And there's so much conflict involved in just those 2 sects of Christianity, one religion. I can see how people would have considered it to be a big, concerning, extremely important issue. And I kind of wonder if the people of today who are insistent that there just be one religion and it basically be Christianity, or like something like Christianity, but with different paint on it. But everybody's got to be Christian, basically, is this attitude by some people who want to be in power. And I really wonder if they truly believe that it's the only way to avoid world conflict is that everybody have these unifying beliefs. I don't have that belief myself. I don't find that I'm closer to that belief now. It's more that I'm beginning to understand just how sincerely it may have been believed and how far they were convinced of it. So, gonna keep looking into the history. Probably gonna read a little bit more in this at some point. Might do it on camera. Um, Hope you enjoyed sharing a look into this book. Um, I'm still a little shallow on the Blavatsky material, so apologies if something in error or I haven't properly depicted exactly what her attitudes are on certain things. I am a student. And I am still learning myself. Um, and yeah, like, subscribe, comment, etc. Peace.